make up for my lack of preparation by producing a study guide. So I'm going to pass out a little study guide here on things that I have found useful in thinking about the legacy of Stalin. And I think here in the heartland of world imperialism, we're subjected to a fairly massive level of propaganda. And we have accepted this caricature, really, of Stalin as this kind of monster, worse than Hitler, worse than Saddam Hussein. We really, it's almost heresy to even think that he was a decent human being. But I think that's very peculiar to us here in the United States. If you look around the world at other countries, I think people have a different picture of Stalin. And particularly if you look at people who have actually made revolutions, they have a different picture of Stalin than we do here. And we probably know Mao's dictum about Stalin was 70% good and 30% bad, maybe not even 30% bad. But here's Che Guevara. I have come to communism because of Daddy Stalin. And nobody must come and tell me that I mustn't read Stalin. I read him when it was very bad to read him. That was another time. And because I'm not very bright and a hard-headed person, I keep on reading him, especially in this new period, now that it is worse to read him. Then, as well as now, I still find a series of things that are very good. So I think this indicates to us that we really have to think outside the box, the bourgeois box in this way, to look at stuff. Yep.
Gene, do you know what year Che?
The source of that is the Joseph Stalin Study Guide, which is on the bottom there. So I'm not sure when that came out, but I'm pretty sure that the source is listed there. And I think, I appreciate your question because we have people all the time that quote people, and you look up the quote and you can't find it, and you find out it's indeed a spurious quote. So
I wasn't concerned about the spuriousness. I just wanted to know when. Before the revolution, after the revolution, while he was in Bolivia, or when he said that.
Yeah, and I apologize for that.
No, that's fine.
Well, professors are supposed to know everything. I should have come up with an answer even if I don't know it.
That would have been the worst thing you could have
That's for real estate sales.
Okay, anyway, so I think it's really important that we do make an effort, and I put some sources here that are very good. And we were fortunate yesterday in having Grover Furr here to speak on the Sergei Kirov murder and the anti-Stalin paradigm. And we're very also fortunate that we have a comrade Raj here that apparently has got a new video camera or something, and he's been taking these things and putting them on the web. So if you're interested, you can see the hour-and-a-half program that Grover Furr did on this. It's on the web already, on YouTube, and the URL is there. And there's also, I put a URL for some critical work about criticism of Furr's approach and so on. But I was very impressed with what Furr had to say yesterday. Not only has he done extensive research into the archives, learning Russian and doing all this research, but he also had a very good approach, because he started out by saying he's not here to defend Stalin. And he pointed out that if you're a defense attorney, what you want to do is get your client off. And you're not really concerned about the truth. You want to present your person in as favorable a light as possible, and make sure he's not convicted of any crime that he probably committed anyway. And that's not what we're concerned about when we want to re-examine Stalin. as Fur says, we need first of all to know the truth. We need to figure out what there is actual evidence for. And I wrote down some of his comments, but basically one of his points is there's no real field of Soviet studies in the United States or on the left. Basically, there is a field of anti-communist Soviet studies, and in order to get published, you have to say bad things about Stalin to indicate your objectivity. So I found his talk very, very useful and relevant. And I urge people to read that, to watch that. There's some other sources I think are very good that I've listed there, included an essay I wrote on the legacy of Stalin, which I need to update and so on, but some other good pieces there. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about is, because I started out, you know, my first exposure to socialism was through the Socialist Labor Party, which denounces everything Soviet and everything that is not the Socialist Labor Party. But they had the initial impact, and then I kind of fell in with the Socialist Workers' Party. And when I was at New York, I'd go down to the Militant Labor Forum and listen. And I consider them very good, very with it group, and I would have, and under their influence, I kind of considered Trotsky the model revolutionary. And I was under this influence for a long time. But then, I guess, several years later in the 80s and so forth, I started to look at the situation in a different way, learn more things about both Trotsky and Stalin and so forth. And I've come to appreciate the role that Stalin played in keeping the Soviet Union together, in leading the Soviet Union through its darkest hours, basically. When, after the death of Lenin, Stalin was there, and then he led, as Gary said, the industrialization effort and the anti-fascist struggle. And there's a number of very reasonable works out there that to basically point out it's not a question of Stalin not making mistakes, because he made lots of mistakes. But the thing is, he learned from all of them, and that he would not give up, and ultimately he represented the interests of the working class. Gary pointed out to me earlier that, you know, Stalin was really, came out of the hood, basically. That he was from Georgia, which, you know, under Tsarism, the Soviet Union was a prison house of nations, and Georgia was one of those things. But he was grew up, his father was a worker, out-of-work worker, and I don't forget whether he left the family or died or whatever. And his mother was faced with the need to raise young Joseph and couldn't do it, so she put him in a seminary where she knew that he'd be taken care of and so forth. So he suffered from this kind of poverty and discrimination from his very, very beginnings. And even later in the party, Stalin was one of those people who represented the kind of the inner guard, the people who stayed in Russia and maintained the party under this very severe repression. And some people contrast, you know, this part of the party with the other people who are the exiles, which included Lenin, but included Trotsky, included Kamenev and Zinoviev and other people who were much more Western-oriented and sophisticated and so forth, and who also came from a different class. So I think it's important to understand who Stalin represented. And I know a lot of people who come out of very repressive backgrounds, you know, in terms of third world countries. And a lot of these people understand why Stalin had to be the way he was. And I think it's very difficult for those of us in the first world, where, you know, I mean, I've never been to jail, I've never been beaten up by a cop, I managed to get a decent job and enjoyed a paycheck and so forth. And it's kind of difficult for us to understand the conditions, the sorts of things that the emerging socialist state, the dictatorship of the proletariat, had to confront. And it required basically a very determined individual. And so that's the light that I bring, that I try to bring to Stalin. And I'll just leave it at that. That I think we need to understand that Stalin, for all his faults, was the best person available to lead the party after the death of Lenin. And a lot of people say, oh, there was a split between, you know, Stalin and Trotsky. There was no split. Just read here. There was a decisive vote in 1927. The left opposition put its case forward and so forth. And the vote defeating the left opposition was 725,000 to 6,000. So this wasn't a split. It was a disgruntled minority leaving the party, basically. Again, looking at it from my perspective and the sources that I've listed here, Stalin was the best person available. He had his faults. He was rude. He insulted Lenin's wife. All these kinds of things. But he was determined. He had the very monumental task of transforming the Soviet Union in order to allow it to confront the fascist threat. And in leading the Soviet Union to these darkest hours, he not only did an important service to the Soviet working class, but to workers everywhere and to humanity. So I'll just leave it at that. And
okay, we're going to open it up, but before we do, we'd like to